Our planet faces an unprecedented health, social, and economic crisis, one that puts every nation on Earth in danger and challenges all fundamental assumptions about our world. The COVID-19 pandemic threatens to reverse decades of development progress, putting the Sustainable Development Goals at risk. It has brutally exposed the vulnerability of developing countries and magnified the inequality that exists both within and between nations. This is the first opportunity since the pandemic began for world leaders to come together and create global solutions for trade and development. The almost 200 countries represented here have a unique opportunity to do things differently, to do things better, to make sure global trade benefits everybody equally. This is our opportunity to forge a shared destiny between developing countries and developed ones, to use technology to create better productive systems, to cut carbon emissions and give our planet another chance, to put in place effective financing for development and establish a sustainable global debt system. We have the potential to give everybody the opportunity to succeed by bridging the digital divide, improving gender equality, boosting productive capacities, and investing in our youth. UNCTAD 15 is a moment for us all to act together, to employ bold new thinking to help address the biggest challenges that face the world. Together, let's create a more equitable and prosperous future for everyone. Together, let's move from inequality and vulnerability to a future of prosperity for all. Because now, more than ever before, trade needs to work for everybody.
Welcome back to Dialogue 3 of this World Leaders Summit of the 15th Quadrennial Conference of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. I just want to say how gracious it was for Prime Minister Motley to acknowledge the logistical feat of actually setting together this conference that's running parallel in Barbados and here in Geneva. And you know, her words of encouragement to the whole team, both technical and admin, and everybody who's tried to make this as successful as it has been so far. Let's hope we can take it to the end just like this. Dialogue 3 is titled Building a More Prosperous Development Path, Matching the Scale of the Moment. And it's now my pleasure to introduce my co-moderator, Sharon Marshall, who's going to tell us who's on the panel. Sharon.
Thank you so much, Peter. And our panel today, quite distinguished. We have Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali, President of Guyana. We are going to have a pre-recorded message from the President of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, and Vice President of the Dominican Republic, Ms. Raquel Peña, as well as Ms. Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and Ms. Winnie Byanyima, Executive Director of the Joint United Nations Program on HIV/AIDS. However, we're going to begin the session with an address from the Secretary General of UNCTAD, Ms. Rebeca Grynspan. An economist by training and a former Vice President of Costa Rica, Ms. Grynspan assumed duties at UNCTAD only last month, on the 30th of September to be precise. She's the first woman to hold this position. Ms. Grynspan has been thrust into the activities of UNCTAD 15 from day one in office. Ladies and gentlemen, UNCTAD Secretary General, Ms. Rebeca Grynspan.
Thank you. Thank you much, Sharon, and I am really honored to be here with President Kenyatta and President Ali. Thank you so much for being with us. And we will hear also from the from the Prime Minister of Pakistan and from the Vice President of Dominican Republic, and my friends, Winnie Byanyima and Vera Songwe. So thank you so much. I also want, if you allow me, to say hello to the ministers from Kenya that are here with us. So thank you, Raquel, Betty, and Monica for being here also. It's not usual, dear presidents, that we have so many women in an economic conference. So this is to show that really when you look for the women, they are there, if you make the extra mile to find it. Well, I have the honor to present this dialogue on the World Leaders Summit that is taking place during the 15th UN Conference of Trade and Development. I have been told not to present the panel, so Sharon already did that. But I just want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank President Kenyatta for the speech he gave yesterday in the inauguration that was so substantive and so important in terms of UNCTAD future and also in terms of what UNCTAD did from Nairobi to Barbados. So thank you so much. That being so I want to refer to the theme of this conference, building a more prosperous development path, matching the scale of the moment. And the question is if we are, and we are not. The simple answer is we are not matching the scale of the moment, what this moment demands from us. The COVID-19 pandemic has claimed almost 5 million lives so far, and this number is most likely to be an underestimate. The pandemic has brought to the surface the main problems that we are facing in the world. And I would say that if you want to cluster them, I would refer to two main problems. First, the inequalities that are rampant in our countries and our international global space. And I refer to inequalities, not only to inequality, because there are many of them that intersect, that interact, and makes development more difficult. The second is our lack of capacity to act collectively. And because of these two, our incapacity to act collectively and the inequalities that are rampant in the world, we are facing the deepest economic recession in more than 100 years, greatly disrupting international trading, monetary and financial system in the process, taking more than 120 million people again into poverty. So the hard-won progress of the last decades were lost in 1 year. And many countries were back 2 decades, not only one. And we are on the risk of facing another lost decade in the future. So when we look at the recovery, we see that we are in divergent paths, with developing countries vaccinating at rates and being able to put packages to protect their people at rates that are only a fraction of the developed world. And when we look at what are the two main reasons for this divergent recovery, and I want to stress this because I am afraid, dear presidents, dear members of the panel, that because the world is recovering in average at a very high rate, they will forget about us. Because, you know, the problem with averages is that when you are in an unequal world, average hide more than they reveal. And that is what's happening. We are expecting 5.3% growth in the world economy, but our countries in the developing world are just below that rate in many, with sluggish rates in many countries. And two main reasons for that are vaccination and financing. First, vaccination and the universal access to vaccine has not happened. And it's true that we have many promises. But you know, it's like a song in Spanish. You always tell me yes, but you don't tell me when. And when is what is important for us. You know that COVAX this year has it decreased their target in vaccination 25%, decrease, because they don't have enough vaccines for the rest of the world. We know that many of the donations that we are receiving that are very important, and thank you for that, but they are coming too close to the expiration date. And many times we don't have time to put the logistics and be able to do the vaccination efficiently. And now that the developed world is discussing, in some instances, the third doses, we are not started with the first one to the majority of the population of the world. LDCs have vaccinated only 2% of their population. So vaccines, the universal access, the trade disruption, the trade restrictions that we saw at the beginning of this pandemic is one of the main obstacles that we have to face. And now that we are going towards MC12 at WTO, those are the things that we have to discuss. The waiver of intellectual property on vaccines. Not because it's a panacea, it is not, but it's a good signal to the world. And we know technology transfer, knowledge transfer, and capacity building to be able to have more production in the world. But at least the signal that we are willing to put people first will be a very important signal for the world. My second point is financing. And with the financial system, we have to say that we are glad that the IMF took the decision to emit 650,000 billions in special drawing rights. You know that the special drawing rights was an idea of UNCTAD. Yeah. But the thing for us is double. First is good, but not good enough. Only Europe put a package forward of 750,000 billions for only the European countries. And we have 650,000 billion for the whole world. So it's not enough. It's good, but not enough. But the second problem is the distribution. 40% goes to the G7 countries. And they don't need the SDRs. And we want that those SDRs will be used for development. How do we make the link? So there is a discussion to put more money of these SDRs in the PRGT, that is for the poor countries. But what about the middle countries? The so-called middle-income countries? We need different facilities. There is a discussion to make a facility for resilience and climate change. Very good. But we also need money in the development banks, because we need to do the investments in health, in education, in social protection, in security, in diversification of our economies. And that is not happening. That link is not happening. And we have, and Vera Songwe is with us, and she has a whole proposal of the liquidity facility for the countries to be able to go to the markets better. And that is not happening. So we have to push this envelope. We have to push for the solutions not to be too little, too late. Because when that happens, and I said this yesterday, dear presidents, dear friends, in the inauguration, when that happens, we lose a decade. You know, I was in government already when we had the big crisis in Latin America, the debt crisis of the 80s. And we said at the beginning, if we won't have a solution for our debt problem in an orderly manner, if we cannot stop the markets from downgrading our countries, if we cannot have the financing to do whatever we have to do to recover growth and inclusiveness and sustainability and resilience. We will lose a decade. We said that. And we lost a decade because it didn't happen. We have to learn from our experience. Let's push the envelope for a consensus, a new consensus building in the world with respect to trade, to investment, to finance, to debt, to technology. Because if we don't, we will have much more suffering. And our people doesn't deserve that. And if that will happen, so we will see more mistrust, more people disengaging from the political system, from the global institutions. So let's make multilateralism work, and a multilateralism that is for the universal membership of the world, not small groups, but all of us. I think that UNCTAD can help because it has a universal membership, because it has a very strong mandate. So I hope to count with you to find the solutions and the consensus and the agreements that we need to really have a recovery that is inclusive and that is sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grynspan, for your impassioned address and about what is required to really match the scale of the moment. Our next speaker is President Kenyatta. His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta is the fourth President of the Republic of Kenya and the party leader of the ruling Jubilee Party. His presidency has been underpinned by a commitment to economic and social transformation, national unity, good governance, regional integration, and intra-Africa trade. Under President Kenyatta's leadership, Kenya has become one of the fastest growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa and ranks among the top 3 African countries on the ease of doing business. Kenya has consolidated its position as a leader on issues such as climate change, the blue economy, and digital technologies. And Nairobi has emerged as a regional hub for major international organizations and corporations. With that introduction, President Kenyatta, I pose the first question. There's no doubt that we need more and not less cooperation, as Secretary Grynspan mentioned a short while ago. Which new forms of dialogue and tools are required to support a more inclusive and sustainable development path? And what role should networks and coalitions play in that regard?
Thank you very much, moderator, for that. And let me begin by saying I could not but agree more with what our Secretary General has just said in her statement, that without doubt the key issues are primarily inequality, and not only inequality between nations, but even inequality within nations. And to also say that the multilateral system seems to have been good when the developing world, or the developed world, was taking full advantage of integrated global markets. But what we see today, unfortunately, is a decline in multilateralism when they have achieved their objectives and when we in the developing world are seeking to achieve ours. So today, we actually need greater multilateralism, and we need an increased capacity to work together with the understanding that if it doesn't work for all of us, it won't work for any one of us. And I do believe that COVID has demonstrated, first and foremost, just how integrated we are, but more so, how, despite that integration, we have seen one part of the globe move forward in vaccinating and preparing her population for reopening, while the bulk of the populations in the world living in developing countries are seemingly being left behind because they have not been vaccinated. We're here in this beautiful island of Barbados, and it is very sad to see that even as we see world economies opening, we are told that one of their mainstays, which is tourism, is still under lockdown. Why? Because of lack of access to vaccines which have been made available to others across the world. And let us say that when COVAX was put together, it was to guarantee fair, equitable access to vaccines for every country in the world. This has not been the case. As we speak today, over 80% of those in the developed countries have been administered with at least 2 doses, and now they tell us of booster doses for a third jab, while many in our countries have yet to receive their first. This cannot be called equity by any standard. And we must ask ourselves what went wrong, because while the COVAX allocation formula was based on population, size, and at that stage we all believed it to be fair and equitable, it failed to take into account country differences in immunization coverage, and also in access to other sources of vaccines. Because there are countries that were applying under COVAX, but yet they had their own sources, and those COVAX vaccines should have been released to other countries across the globe that did not have access to an alternative source. So we need to really look at this and ask ourselves whether global is working for all of us or whether it's actually just working for a few. And despite the fact that we are all talking about the COVID pandemic, we shouldn't forget the promises and pledges that were made to us even under climate change arrangements. We were all promised in Paris how the world, and especially the developed part of the world, would step up and ensure that the most vulnerable and the most affected nations would be taken into account and would be supported, going back to the issue of access to financial capacity. A lot of those promises, even as we head to Glasgow, have yet to be fulfilled. So on the one hand, we see the promises, we see the pledges, but we fail to see the implementation. And yet again, just as with this pandemic, we are not the cause, but yet we are the ones who suffer the most. So we really need to actually ask ourselves, how do we strengthen once again multilateral collaboration, and how do we ensure that multilateral cooperation is in the interest of every single global citizen and not just the interest of those who have the means. So this is one key area where I want to totally concur and agree with the Secretary General. The second, I believe that as we face what we are facing, we need to see deeper regional integration and deeper South-South integration. This, I believe, is critical because we need our numbers and we need to be able to pool the limited resources that we have to be able to work towards having the capacity to stand, to protect and to defend our interests together, and that our voice is much stronger when we are together. And this is something that, as the President in office, especially of the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, we are trying to pursue. Together we have a stronger voice than we do individually. Together, we have the capacity to get our issues heard. Together, our voice is much stronger in multilateral organizations across to be able to get our message through. And such cooperation will help our own economies be able to bolster and do better. We saw that when, as a continent in Africa, we came together to develop a mechanism to support each other during the COVID pandemic. As a result of that, we also worked together with CARICOM to bring them together and to make them part of us as we all went to face the challenge of access to vaccines. And we found that our voice was indeed much more stronger and more powerful when we were together. So this deepening of regional cooperation, deepening of South-South cooperation is equally just as an important agenda. I think the next thing is the strengthening of our private sector and the involvement of our private sector in our engagements and in our activities. As we have seen also in the developed world, it is the private sector that was at the vanguard of developing vaccines. We need to strengthen and to give feet to our private sectors and to create an enabling environment for them to thrive, so that the future vaccines of tomorrow will be developed in our regions and give ourselves greater capacity. So I also believe working together to strengthen our private sectors, to give them more meat and greater ability by integrating our markets, improving trade ties between our various regions. I believe this also is going to be critical in giving ourselves the capacity to face future global challenges by deepening the impact and the role of private sector in our respective economies and regions. So lastly, just in conclusion, I want to just say that in all forms of cooperation, the key is to strengthen our voice. And our voice can only be strengthened by pulling together and coming together, but also within our respective societies by strengthening the voice of our women, of our youth, so that we also bridge the inequality that exists within nations. So the key to cooperation is just to strengthen voices. Voices of our respective countries as we face the rest of the world by coming together, and within countries by strengthening the voice of those more vulnerable groups, women and youth, to also ensure that we bring an end to in-country inequality as we tackle global inequality as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Kenyatta. The recent approach between Africa and the Caribbean region has been most heartening, and we hope that it will strength to strength. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali, who is the 9th Executive President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. He was elected as a member of Guyana's National Assembly in 2006. Dr. Ali previously served as his country's Minister of Housing and Water and Minister of Tourism, Industry and Commerce. Prior to entering politics, he was employed as a project manager and senior planner in Guyana's Ministry of Finance. President Ali, my question to you: the current crisis has highlighted the need to change our development path. In your view, how willing or able are we to do so?
Thank you very much. First of all, I don't know whether the crisis necessitates the changing of our development path, but the first thing we have to ask is, in assessing what we've accomplished in the current path, what are the outcomes? And I think my dear friend, President of Kenya, let me start by addressing an issue is the world recovering in this pandemic? The world cannot be recovering when a developed country would have achieved more than 80% vaccination rate and the less developing countries are below 3%. The world is not recovering. It is the developed countries that are recovering. And unless there is a push for greater isolation now, and we're seeing that coming, because part of the recovery effort is to differentiate vaccination, differentiate those countries that are vaccinated from those who are not, and then restrictions to travel and the movement of people are coming into effect. So what this is telling us? This is telling us that the pandemic, we thought that the pandemic taught us a singular lesson. That is, we are not isolated, we are all interconnected. But what are we seeing in the response? We're seeing more isolation, we're seeing greater insulation, and we're seeing policies now that would expand that isolation. And I want to make this very clear. It is not that the developing country did not try to get the vaccine. After, for example, coordinated with the private sector, a single individual to negotiate the purchase of vaccines from all the suppliers. In CARICOM, we did the same. Many countries did the same. But the vaccines were just not available to us, the developing world. So this message must be clear. We were not asking for handouts. We were not asking for preferential treatment. We were asking for fair treatment. And that is what we negotiated for, fair treatment. And we were not granted fair treatment. That is the bottom line. We were left on the back burner. And we continue to be left there. And in our quest to ensure we were not far back, we went to all sources of vaccines. And now what we are told? We are told that if you tap into this source, well, then you will not be able to travel to us. So it is not about a new pathway. It is how do we fix this path? How do we ensure that this path does not lead to greater isolation? That's the first question that we must answer. Then let us take the whole issue of where this leads us. We're not in a vaccination problem anymore. We are in an economic and social problem. So for this region, for example, we lost 70% of our revenue in tourism. 70% of the revenue from tourism. So the $650 billion would not address that. And that money is also coming with conditionality. The money comes with conditionalities that are in the past. Because the context of what we are faced with today. If you're to achieve the SDGs by 2030, how are we going to do so when we have regression in learning now as a result of the pandemic? When we had to reprioritize our expenditure to focus on health care in response to the pandemic, whilst our revenue decreased by 70%. And for this region, to compound that issue is that it is estimated that we spend 0.5 to 1 billion US dollars annually just to repair damaged infrastructure from natural disasters. So if you take a 10-year period, we have to set aside $10 billion to respond, at a minimum, to respond to natural disasters. And guess what is the development package for the region? Less than $4 billion in 10 years. So there's a mismatch. And unless we are willing to correct the mismatch, unless we are willing to address the issue of fairness and how we are treated, then this will be a prolonged problem for us. And they talk about long COVID. We are not even assessing the medium and long-term impact of COVID as yet. We don't know. We don't know what will be the impact on future health care because there can be other health issues. How do we respond to that? We have to respond to a loss of revenue of 70% in the tourism sector. We have to respond to growing disasters. So the world is not recovering. Let me make it very clear. And if the developed country believe that they're recovering, then it is clear that their message to us is that we will recover at the isolation of the rest of the world. We will isolate the rest of the world. Because you can't claim recovery when the rest of the world is, the least developed countries are at 3% vaccination rate. So let's be very clear and frank on that. The second issue is the issue of the institutions. And my brother, the President of Kenya, raised the issue about multilateralism. We all speak glowingly about the importance of multilateralism in advancing the world. But we should introspect a bit and ask ourselves, are the institutions that would allow multilateralism to work and to deliver, are they delivering? Are they geared towards the achievement of what we want to achieve? Or manipulation system? And we have to ask difficult questions, because we cannot speak about a new pathway or find new means when existing framework allows us to do that, but there are structural problems or there are institutional problems. And we have to have a frank discussion on that. What is hindering multilateralism? What is driving multilateralism? And where the mismatches. And we have to be able to fix that mismatch. And that is why I think the idea of the strong bonding between Africa and the Caribbean and more South-South cooperation is critical at this moment, because it is the coming together of the numbers and the bringing together of the common objectives and common goal that would apply enough pressure on the system for us to understand that for multilateralism to work, the framework that supports it must work, and must work independently and fairly. That is important for us. The issue of inequality is also a big problem that we have to address. We have to address inequality from a developed and developing perspective. We have to address it from an inter-country perspective and regional perspective. So take climate change, for example. We are going to COP, but I don't know if I changed it. I don't know how many of us meet COP, because there's a criteria now of having to be on a colored list. Otherwise you have to have 14 days quarantine. So the countries, so guess what? All the countries that are most affected by climate change find themselves on that list. So I don't know what is the, and these, I don't know, I hope it's not by design, but these are some of the challenges developing countries face, and the least developed. We have to represent our interests, but 90% of the time you find yourself on a list or some document that curtail how you represent yourself. In the region now, in CARICOM region, we have a big debate that is coming up. The Prime Minister Motley has already raised among leaders, and that is the universal corporate tax rate. These are all things that are coming up that we have to deal with. So climate change is the other issue. We hear a lot of talk about new commitment. But President Kenyatta raised the perfect question. Don't tell us about new commitment now. How are we going to honor the old commitment? When are we going to honor the old commitment? When are we going to be true to that that was made? And unless we are able, and that is why I'm so happy that Barbados has taken the leadership of bringing such an important event to the region. They're not curtailed by size of country or population. It is a vision. And the vision is to demonstrate to the world that we are an equal partner on the table and we are willing to take our place on the table. And that is what we have to, together, we have to send this message very strong. We are an equal partner and we are prepared. We are also prepared to do what is right. Because the developing countries also, sometimes we are our own enemy. Because we allow ourselves to be in a position that we have to get the developed world to come and fix some problems that are basic. So we too have to ensure we stick strongly to foundational principles and values so that our system is strong enough to withstand any strong lecturing from any other system. And I'm sure we all are aware as leaders as to what some of those issues are, from the democracy front coming all the way down. So, to speak about areas, a new path, and new ideas in the context of what is happening would be, I think, giving a free pass to those who have not allowed the existing system to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Ali, and to thank all of the panelists for their very frank assessment of where we are in terms of matching the scale of the moment. Peter, I now come back to you in Geneva for our next presentation.
Many thanks, Sharon. Now we're going to be taking a message from the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, who's been a very, very loud voice in charging rich nations to take responsibility for climate change and reduce their carbon emissions and help countries face these challenges. On his part, he has promised that his country is aiming to produce 60% clean energy by 2030, and has also promised that in the next 5 years, his country will plant another 10 billion trees. That's in addition to 10 billion that has already been planted. Let's listen to Prime Minister Imran Khan.
Excellencies, Madam Secretary General, the UN Council on Trade and Development, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to say I'm pleased to join this very important dialogue. Secondly, I want to congratulate Barbados for holding this conference. There are 4 issues I want to talk about, Madam Secretary General. Number 1 is the distribution of COVID vaccine. Unfortunately, the richer countries are vaccinating their people 20 times faster than the developing world. This inequity has to be removed. So I would ask the Chair that you must try your best to make sure that the vaccine has more equitable distribution. Secondly, debt relief. I had campaigned for debt relief for the developing world because everything in the developing world, because of the lockdowns imposed because of the COVID-19, have disproportionately affected the poorer nations, the developing nations. So I would recommend that debt relief should continue till the pandemic is over. Thirdly, climate finance. Madam Secretary General, the developing world, and I specifically speak about the small island groups, of course countries like Pakistan, who are more vulnerable to climate change than even the richer countries. The small islands, because of the rising sea levels, countries like Pakistan, because we depend upon water from our glaciers for our survival. And climate change has, the rate of melting of the glaciers has increased phenomenally since the weather has got warmer. So I would request that the richer countries contribute in climate finance and especially help those countries whose contribution to carbon emissions are minimal and yet are disproportionately affected by climate change. And fourthly, Madam Secretary General, and for me as crucial as the impact of climate change, is the illicit flow of money from the poor countries, from the developing countries, to richer capitals, to tax havens, to haven destinations. According to the Fact-I panel, $7 trillion are parked in these tax havens and haven destinations. And also, annually, $1 trillion leave the developing countries towards these safe havens. And this plunder is taking place because of the corrupt ruling elites of the developing world. Madam Secretary General, this is a huge crisis. In the coming years, this is going to get worse. This has to stop. And the only way it will stop is if the recommendations made by the Fact-I panel should be implemented. Unfortunately, the richer countries, which can do something about it, unfortunately, there is no incentive or motivation to do anything. What it is doing is that it is crushing the people in the developing world. Not just because the money is siphoned off, which should be spent on human development, but because when the money leaves their countries, it affects their currency, which devalues, which then leads to inflation, causes poverty. But eventually, even the richer countries will get affected. Because right now, what you see of economic migrants is a trickle. People dying to get to richer countries. But if this inequality, which is the rich, this is causing the gap between the rich and the poor countries increasing, and between the rich and the poor countries increasing. If this trend continues, the richer countries will have to build walls to keep out the hordes of economic migrants. So I urge you, Madam Secretary General, to do everything to raise awareness that this huge injustice which is being done to the people of the developing world has to stop. Thank you.
It now gives me great pleasure to welcome our next panelist. Her Excellency Ms. Raquel Peña Rodriguez is the Vice President of the Dominican Republic and is entrusted with the coordination and oversight of the Healthcare Cabinet. This office is responsible for the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including the country's vaccination plan. Under her leadership, the Dominican Republic's national vaccination program has been named as reference for the region. The coronavirus positivity rate is near 7%. The lethality rate is one of the lowest in the world, and close to 63% of the target population has had both doses of the vaccine. The correct handling of the pandemic has allowed the country to reopen economically, and jobs as well as tourism indicators are better than pre-pandemic figures. Ms. Peña, question to you. To build a more prosperous future in your country, what do you expect in terms of cooperation and multilateralism in the area of trade?
Su Excelencia, señor Uhuru Kenyatta, Presidente de la República de Kenia. Su Excelencia, doctor Irfaan Ali, Presidente de la República Cooperativa de Guyana. Su Excelencia, señor Imran, Primer Ministro de Pakistán. Su Excelencia, señora Mia Amor, Primera Ministra de Barbados. Honorable señora Rebeca, Grynspan, Secretaria General de la Conferencia de Naciones Unidas de Comercio y Desarrollo. Honorable señora Vera Songwe, secretaria ejecutiva de la Comisión Económica de las Naciones Unidas para África, honorable señora Winnie Byanyima, directora ejecutiva de ONU-SIDA, honorable señor Mauricio Claver-Carone, presidente del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, señores moderadores, señoras y señores, muy buenos días. Deseamos en primer lugar agradecer la invitación de la Conferencia de las Naciones Unidas para el Comercio y Desarrollo para participar en este importante diálogo y en particular en esta cumbre de líderes mundiales. También queremos hacer público nuestro reconocimiento a la señora Mia Amor, primera ministra de Barbados, por su liderazgo y por la excelente organización de esta conferencia. Aprovecho esta oportunidad para reconocer a la Secretaría General de la UNCTAD por los esfuerzos desplegados y por el arduo trabajo elaborado para la realización de esta conferencia ministerial. Felicitamos a la señora Rebeca Grynspan por su designación como Secretaria General de la UNCTAD y por ser la primera mujer en ocupar esta posición. Esta conferencia se realiza en circunstancias excepcionales. La pandemia del COVID-19 es, ante todo, una catástrofe humanitaria sin precedentes recientes, cuyos efectos van mucho más allá de la salud de las poblaciones, ya que afecta a la gran mayoría de las economías del mundo, especialmente a los países en desarrollo que necesitan y demandan una respuesta inmediata a los estragos que estamos enfrentando. El balance es lamentable, no solo por las vidas que se han perdido, sino también por el trauma provocado en el tejido social y en la estructura económica de las naciones. Siendo esta una crisis de dimensiones globales, exige una acción de igual magnitud, decidida, coordinada, inclusiva y coherente. La cooperación internacional es ahora más importante que nunca, tanto en el área del comercio como en otras igualmente fundamentales, como por ejemplo la salud y la tecnología. No olvidemos que las bases del multilateralismo son la integración y la cooperación. Y ahora se ha hecho tan evidente que debe ser renovado y fortalecido. Hemos sido, en cambio, y no para bien, testigos de un aumento del proteccionismo y de la exclusión, ratificando la necesidad de remozar el multilateralismo. Muchos estados adoptaron medidas de restricción en las exportaciones de productos y equipos médicos, medicamentos y vacunas. Esas medidas unilaterales, como han indicado varios informes de la propia UNCTAD, han exacerbado la escasez de suministro de bienes esenciales, acentuando en particular las vulnerabilidades de los países en desarrollo y cuyas economías necesitan de la solidaridad de las naciones fuertes. La falta de una respuesta global a la crisis ha tenido como consecuencia más sufrimiento y más víctimas de la pandemia, a no lograrse un acceso equilibrado de todos los países a las vacunas como fórmula primaria para afrontar la enfermedad del coronavirus. Una pandemia solo puede combatirse exitosamente mediante la cooperación y la solidaridad global. El gobierno dominicano, me complace decirlo, ha hecho su parte, donando hasta ahora un total de 820,000 dosis de vacuna a países amigos de nuestra región. Nuestro gobierno entiende que la comunidad internacional debe tomar nuevas medidas para mantener en buen curso la ejecución de la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible, que es el proyecto mundial más relevante que intenta definir un marco integral de múltiples niveles y actores para la viabilidad en la cooperación internacional. En este sentido, el comercio internacional desempeña un rol de gran importancia en la consecución de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Compartimos las palabras de la señora Ngozi Okonjo, directora general de la Organización Mundial del Comercio, cuando dijo que el comercio contribuyó de forma importante a alcanzar avances históricos en materia de desarrollo y reducción de la pobreza durante los 30 años anteriores a la pandemia del COVID-19 y será un elemento central de nuestros esfuerzos por poner fin a la pandemia. El comercio es un ingrediente necesario para reconstruir una economía mundial más fuerte y más inclusiva y reactivar el progreso hacia el logro de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Los efectos del comercio son transversales en la sociedad. La gran mayoría de los 17 objetivos de desarrollo sostenible pueden ser positivamente impactados por un comercio internacional justo y equilibrado. Por ejemplo, para que puedan ser alcanzados los objetivos del fin de la pobreza y el hambre cero, deben, entre otros factores, eliminarse las subvenciones que causan distorsiones en los mercados agropecuarios, lo que beneficiará a los agricultores y productores, como indica la OMC. La seguridad alimentaria solo será posible si los mercados agropecuarios funcionan sin obstáculos y con transparencia. El objetivo relativo a la salud y bienestar es, hoy en día, por razones de el comercio desempeñaría un papel fundamental para aumentar la producción de vacunas y lograr que el crecimiento fuera más inclusivo al permitir a los países aprovechar un crecimiento más elevado, entre otros sectores. Las experiencias derivadas de la pandemia, sin embargo, ponen de manifiesto que el sistema de comercio multilateral de la OMC, como señalan los estudios de la UNCTAD, tiene una capacidad limitada para manejar la emergencia que azota el entorno comercial internacional. Según estos reportes, una de las limitaciones reveladas en la crisis actual fue que las normas de la OMC tenían poca capacidad para coordinar las medidas comerciales de emergencia que han sido adoptadas unilateralmente por los miembros sin consultar a los socios comerciales. Esa es una parte importante de las reformas a las que debe orientarse ese organismo internacional. Para lograr un aumento de la producción de vacunas en el marco de la próxima reunión ministerial de la OMC, se deben adoptar decisiones como la excepción temporal de aquellas obligaciones que puedan frenar la producción y la distribución equitativa de las vacunas y los medicamentos contra el COVID-19. De gran importancia es la conclusión en la OMC sobre las subvenciones a la pesca. Este acuerdo debe procurar prohibir ciertas formas de subvenciones a la pesca que contribuyan a la sobrecapacidad y la pesca excesiva, eliminar las subvenciones que favorecen a la pesca ilegal, no declarada y no reglamentada. Dicho acuerdo debe tomar en cuenta la situación particular de los países en desarrollo y menos adelantados, y no afectar la pesca artesanal o de subsistencia. Es esencial que se hagan todos los esfuerzos para el logro de acuerdos sustantivos y ambiciosos en el marco de la próxima conferencia ministerial de la OMC, tomando en cuenta el trato especial y diferenciado para los países en vía de desarrollo. Los acuerdos deberían facilitar la integración de dichos países en el sistema, fortaleciendo el acceso al mercado de sus productos de exportación y otorgándoles las flexibilidades necesarias para mejorar y vigorizar sus sistemas productivos. Una conferencia ministerial de la OMC exitosa fortalecerá la institución y el sistema multilateral de comercio, el cual se ha visto debilitado en los últimos años. Consideramos igualmente que la cooperación internacional en materia comercial debe ayudar a mantener los mercados abiertos, incluyendo las cadenas de suministro mundiales de bienes y servicios sanitarios esenciales. Las exportaciones de los países en desarrollo no deben ser obstaculizadas a través de barreras arancelarias y no arancelarias innecesarias, así como también que les dé la flexibilidad necesaria a estos países en el marco de la OMC para poder ayudar y fortalecer a sus productores, en particular los de productos agropecuarios, a los fines de garantizar la seguridad alimentaria. Es por todo ello que la ronda de Doha, llamada a estar enfocada en el desarrollo, no puede seguir inconclusa y debe llegar a término con un resultado que considere las necesidades de los países en desarrollo. República Dominicana apoya firmemente que el sistema multilateral que cumplan sus normas, se fortalezca su sistema de soluciones de diferencias y se tenga en cuenta el trato especial y diferenciado que se le debe dar a los países en condiciones económicas diferentes, de forma tal que puedan integrarse plenamente al sistema multilateral de comercio y beneficiarse de este. Consideramos que la UNCTAD tiene un rol fundamental como agencia de coordinación de las Naciones Unidas para los temas del comercio y el desarrollo, en la asistencia a los países en vía de crecimiento para superar los desafíos a los que se enfrentan. Es por esto que apoyamos las iniciativas y trabajos de la UNCTAD, en particular en lo relativo al financiamiento, manejo de la deuda externa y apoyo a los países en desarrollo para integrarse al sistema multilateral de comercio, así como la promoción de la inversión extranjera. Y en este respecto, apoyamos que se aporten mayores recursos a la UNCTAD para de esta forma fortalecer su trabajo analítico y estratégico, así como la asistencia técnica y financiera que aporta a los países en desarrollo. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, Señora Peña. Thank you very much. Now it's time to introduce our next guest. It's somebody who I am very proud to say I've had on my program on the BBC several times, and the only reason for that is because she always has something very important to say. Now, as Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Ms. Vera Songwe's reforms have focused on ideas for a prosperous Africa and have brought to the fore critical issues of macroeconomic stability, development, finance, private sector growth, poverty and inequality. Ms. Songwe is also the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for West Africa, for Africa, I beg your pardon. Now, upon her appointment, she became the first woman to lead the digital transformation, trade and competitiveness. Ms. Songwe, great to see you again. What do you think are some of the barriers that have hindered further cooperation in the area of trade and development? And what are your suggestions on how to overcome some of them?
Thank you. Good to see you again. And I think I just need to put my translation off. Excellencies, distinguished presidents, vice presidents, all heads of government, my fellow colleagues at the United Nations, of course, DG Grynspan, congratulations again on the appointment at UNCTAD at this very critical time. And of course, Ngozi at the WTO. I think two powerful women and two institutions we need very much. And let me answer your question. I think, at the beginning of the year, Africa was positive. Africa decided to continue to, push forward with a design that we have been 20, 50, 60 years in the making called the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And I think that very belief that despite, a 25-year hiatus from a recession, and we're about to enter one, and we had a health pandemic and, of course, the climate crisis, that Africa decided to continue going forward with the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is, I think, Africa's testimony to acknowledging that we know where our growth comes from. Now, what is one of the biggest impediments to it? It's logistics, it's trade itself. It's the fact that, as we saw during this crisis, when the pandemic hit, let's take a country like Egypt, all trade in the Suez Canal stopped. 17% of Egypt's revenue to GDP got lost. The problem of, and this is where I think we really need UNCTAD, is this, almost bilateral nationalistic trade barriers create such a huge divide in the population. There is growth enough in the world. However, in Africa, we're not nearly there. We're only at 6%. Before we were at 16 and 18%. Intra-Africa trade, however, because precisely, as also His Excellency President Kenyatta said, the cooperation between the African countries, the fact that they could get together and put in place protocols for ensuring that faster trade has actually created faster growth in intra-Africa trade than it has in global trade. So the first thing I think is really seeing if we can stop the sort of, nationalistic export bans that are put in place when we have crises and pandemics. We saw this in 2008. We're seeing it even worse in 2020 and 21 with the health crisis. The second one, of course, is the different protocols that we have around the WTO that need to be lifted. We've seen, conversations around TRIPS, conversations around the use of, even patented drugs, the difficulty in certifying them and allowing African producers to be able to produce, that are patented. How can we do that? Ensure that we actually then result them out of the continent. FDA, particularly for Europe, one of the new barriers to trade has become, the phytosanitary conditions. We've now hidden behind phytosanitary conditions to ensure that we don't have enough trade. And I think we must, as we discuss trade, and UNCTAD takes the lead in this with WTO, ensure that phytosanitary do not become the next barriers to trade. And so non-tariff barriers are really, really important, both within Africa, but outside of Africa. Thank you.
Vera Songwe. Let's go to our next panelist now, and Ms. Winnie Byanyima is another one who I'm quite familiar with because I have interviewed her on a number of occasions. Great to see you. She's the Executive Director, Joint United Nations Program on HIV. Ms. Byanyima leads the United Nations efforts to end the AIDS epidemic by the year 2030. She believes that healthcare is a human right and was an early champion of a people's vaccine against the coronavirus that is available and free of charge to everyone, everywhere. Before joining UNAIDS, Ms. Byanyima served as the Executive Director of Oxfam International. Ms. Byanyima, a question for you. In your view, is global health a dream? What role has trade played in ensuring global health, and what role should it play? Over to you.
Thank you, moderator. And Rebeca Grynspan, my sister, congratulations on this conference and for your appointment to head UNCTAD. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to be the same panel with His Excellency President Pena, and of course, to be with my sister Vera Songwe, the head of ECA. Global health is not a dream. To answer your question, access to quality health care is the right of every single human being on this planet, and it is achievable. But we have accepted for decades a distorted economic order, where the things that really matter in life have been considered secondary to market pluralism. That's the problem. Look at the current crisis. There's widespread acceptance that a few companies that are receiving billions or received billions in public investment, about 100 billion, in support of their scientific innovations, can monopolize the profits of COVID-19 vaccines. It's accepted. We are being compelled to accept that vaccines are a commodity, the same as a car or this dress that I'm wearing. So we have a rigged and hugely unjust economic system protecting a handful of companies their huge profits over the lives of people. Does it make sense? All the panelists so far agreed that while more 60% of people in rich countries have been vaccinated, only 4% have been vaccinated in African countries. When in fact we know that by not getting vaccines to everyone, it's costing the world $2.3 trillion. That is, in our calculation, 33 times more than it would cost to vaccinate everyone. It doesn't make economic sense. So we need, and this is where the opportunity is. Who said that we never waste a crisis? We need rich governments who are continuing to block to join the 120 countries, most of them developing, who are supporting a temporary TRIPS waiver at the WTO, so that intellectual property is shared. Intellectual property rights are waived so that technology and know-how are shared to protect humanity. This is an opportunity of crisis where the rules can be applied, because actually the provision for a waiver is there. It's a question of agreeing to apply the waiver. The rules have said that it is such a waiver. Now it is time a precedent in the international property rules such that in future crises, humanity is protected. That's what rules to work for humanity, not for profits. Secondly, 120 million people have fallen into poverty as a result of COVID. That's a figure I think I got from the World Bank. 810 million suffering hunger. Even before the crisis, 10,000 people were dying daily from lack of health care. 25,000 die of hunger every day. Yet it is UNCTAD who told us in 2020 through their report that Africa alone could gain $89 billion by curbing all sorts of illicit financial flows. But that's the illicit. Then there is also the legal, the tax dodging, the tax avoidance that is legal. Even more could be saved there. Pandora Papers that have come out last week revealed once again the regular practice, very legal practice of rich individuals hiding billions through creating shell companies in tax havens. In fact, the papers reveal that such actions are not the exception in powerful circles among economic elites. So now you even hear many claiming now that, well, I didn't do anything wrong. Of course they did nothing wrong. But it's just that the rules are wrong. The rules are rigged. The rules of taxation are rigged against the majority. Ordinary people who pay their taxes, richer people can avoid. So that's why I say that the rules that govern trade and international cooperation are rigged against the 99% and are pro the 1%, are rigged against developing countries and pro some rich countries. To achieve global health and build societies that are fair, human, and value the life of each and every single person, wherever you are, we have to unrig some rules. So, rich countries have agreed as a first step, faced with this global recession, that they are going to set a universal minimum corporate tax floor, a tax floor of 15%. That's great. Again, it is crisis that has forced them to look for ways to gather more revenues, just like the time of the global financial crisis. So this is good. But that kind of a measure that they have talked about must benefit themselves. So we need to have a higher universal corporate tax rate, a base rate. It should be higher. And we must ensure that it is paid everywhere where economic activity happens, so that developing countries also benefit from that reform, not like what happened with the BEPS process. So with those resources, if those resources can come in, if we can tax progressively and close tax loopholes, we would have the money we need for public health care. Would be a step closer to achieving that dream. It's now a dream, but it can be achieved. Healthcare, quality healthcare for each and every person. But this is an opportunity for changing some of the rules this crisis presents it. I've mentioned one on global corporate taxation and also on intellectual property rules. But others have also been mentioned, debt and finance and the global financial architecture. But let me pause there.
Thanks, Ms. Byanyima. Thank you very much. Very introspective stuff there from you, as always. Now, let's get a message now from Dr. Mauricio Claver-Carone, President of the Inter-American Development Bank. Since 2020, he also chairs the board of the executive directors of the IDB Invest, the private sector arm of IDB Group, and donors committee of the IDB Lab, the bank's incubator for innovative development projects. Under his leadership, the bank has developed a blueprint for post-pandemic recovery and prioritized efforts to avert another lost decade in Latin America and the Caribbean. Mr. Carone has led an unprecedented response to the immediate impact of COVID-19, including $1 billion in support of countries' vaccine purchases and distribution plans, and a first-of-its-kind guarantee to help countries better compete to obtain the life-saving shots. Let's hear him.
That's a great question. First of all, let me thank Secretary General Grynspan for inviting me to participate. Obviously, as always, we commend you for your leadership and that of the UN conference, and for always advocating for our region, for Latin America and the Caribbean, on the world stage, and particularly during these challenging times. Now, obviously, I'm not with you in person, but it's really a privilege to virtually sit down alongside my distinguished panelists for this conversation, including leaders from our member countries, President Ali, who was a pleasure to be with you, sir, who I met with just a few days ago at UNGA, as well as Vice President Peña. Now, when I think about multilateralism at the service of development and what it should look like, I think of several structural aspects. Now, the IDB represents many of them, as we are, for one, a development bank that's devoted and majority owned by the region we serve, also an institution that takes a holistic approach to development challenges that beyond the political vicissitudes of any particular moment in any of our countries, also an organization that works with all branches of national governments, plus sub-regional, even local ones. We're also an organization that simultaneously works with other stakeholders, crowding in private sector, for example, working with civil society. And perhaps most importantly, though, we're an organization that, while approaching challenges and opportunities on a macro level, also has integrated presences in the countries and communities that we're working to benefit. So these are all structural characteristics that have truly made the IDB more strategic and therefore a more effective development partner. They've also helped inform our Vision 2025 plan for the region's recovery and sustainable growth, which identifies 5 key areas where our investment will be most impactful: integration, strengthen value chains, digitalization, SMEs, gender equality, and of course, climate change. Now, when I think lessons learned at the IDB and what I've observed in the wider world of multilateral efforts, there are many concrete examples of real progress being made by leveraging our institutional strengths. For example, the pandemic struck our region, the IDB worked hand in hand with the WHO, the World Health Organization, and PAHO, the Pan-American Health Organization, to find complementarities in our capacities and both in our approaches. For our part here at the IDB, we made $1 billion tranche available to help our countries finance the purchase and rollout of vaccines, much of which went to covering purchases made through the COVAX facility, which of course is co-led by WHO, and counts on, for example, UNICEF as a delivery partner. To date, through this mechanism, we have committed resources to 10 countries, and that already has saved lives. And saving lives, of course, is the most basic type of development that there is. In parallel, the IDB launched an initiative to help our countries better compete for vaccines by resolving the indemnity obligations, a key obstacle to contract negotiations. We're the first and only multilateral development bank to offer such an instrument to its clients. And so these are just some good examples of multilaterals working together and individually as well, and we must continue to replicate such collaboration and coordination. At the same time, multilaterals can serve development by shaping and directing our efforts, that they can the key underlying climate change, even when not the primary goal of projects, and do that together. I'll give you a big example. Women, they've borne the brunt of COVID-19, worsening already gaping gender inequality in our region. And so 40% of the IDB Group's pandemic loans has included a focus on differential effects on women and girls. Most have provided monetary transfers or improved access to services for women, as well as loans for women-owned small businesses. So the question, can multilateralism and multilateral serve development better? Absolutely. Look, despite our efforts on COVID-19, just 1 in 4 people in America and the Caribbean has been fully vaccinated. Multilateral leadership has led to the definition and pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, of the Paris Agreement, and yet the world continues to fall dangerously short. Look, these are highly complex challenges, and of course, multilaterals are not responsible alone. In the face of these challenges, an overarching point is that we have to work together, both as multilaterals and as part of a broader system in which all parts are as efficient and as mutually reinforcing as possible. We need more initiatives like the joint country platforms among the MDBs, for example, and efforts like those underway at the IDB to be more efficient, maximize our resources, find new creative financial tools, like crowd-in private sector financing. These steps are clearly going to help us make the most of our capacity, but also bring about development gains for all of our societies.
And, there just seems to be a recurring theme that underlies all the messages, or most of the messages that we've heard since we started on Monday, that more needs to be done. It seems as if we all know what needs to be done, but are we doing enough? More needs to be done. I think that's the underlying theme of this 15th quadrennial UNCTAD conference. Let me just hand you over back to my colleague in Barbados, Sharon. Sharon, it's been quite an, hasn't it?
And to pardon it, not at the moment demands joint ingenuity and enterprise, as has been clearly stated. So I'm going to ask our panelists to give their closing statements and ask them to focus on the 2 most urgent actions that are required to reinvigorate multilateralism. President Kenyatta, I'll start with you.
Thank you once again, and let me just say, back to what we said before, inclusivity, system, as my brother Ali here has just talked about. It's not about changing the system, but getting the existing system to work and to work for all. I think that's what I would like to say in conclusion.
And President Ali, you've heard President Kenyatta repeat a comment that you made earlier. Do you have anything to add as your closing statement?
I have a few things to add.
Okay.
But let me say, first, let's talk more action. We have to move to an action-oriented agenda. Secondly, a hold-on commitment. Let's hold on commitment, and let us work fulfilling existing commitments. That's the second one. Thirdly, it is for us to work towards a fairer system, one in which we move from inequality to equality. Those are important factors that we have to fix now. Nothing new. We have to fix those things now, as my brother, President Kenyatta, would have said. Once we fix those things now and work towards a fairer system, then we will be on a good road, a good footing. Also, we have to work on better coordination among institutions. What we see is a lot of duplication, a lot of stepping over each other. So unless we have better coordination, we won't go anywhere. So from isolation to collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments and Vice President Pena, I turn to you to closing remarks.
Gracias una vez más por la invitación. Y quisiera preguntar para que realmente, pues, todos los países pudiéramos unirnos. La pandemia nos ha dado una gran oportunidad de ver de que unidos pues podemos ser más fuertes. Tenemos problemas comunes, tenemos soluciones comunes. Si las enfrentamos de manera aunada, podremos nosotros pues brindar una mejor calidad de vida a todos los habitantes de cada uno de nuestros países. Agradezco una vez más la invitación y reitero todo lo que podamos nosotros a través de la República Dominicana servir, reunirnos, dialogar, discutir para buscar esas soluciones comunes. Estamos prestos a eso. Dios los bendiga.
Gracias. Now, I was told that Ms. Songwe might have had to leave. I'm not sure if she's still with us. If she is, oh, she is still with us. Very good. So then I'm going to invite you to give your closing remarks and to identify two of the most urgent actions that are required.
Thank you again. I think very short, I want to come back again to what Ms. Grynspan said. We are living in a 2020, a crisis, 2021, a crisis like we have never seen before. The institutions that we use to solve the crises of before cannot be the institutions that we use to solve this crisis. We must change this. I think the Prime Minister of Barbados is one of the ones on the forefront of this. Today we are calling for on-lending of SDRs. 25 to 30% of those SDRs must be on lead so that Africans and all the countries in the developing world can do three things. First of all is get access to the vaccines without overburdening their deficits. We predict at the Economic Commission for Africa that we will need to buy vaccines for another 3 years. This is going to be at least another 5% debt to GDP increase in many countries. We're going to need to fund that at concessional and long-term maturity rates. And this is one of the big things and the big ask we're having. The second one is, of course, to allow for emerging market economies to have access to the capital markets. We see that the capital markets are a bulwark of stability. We must allow for the $13 trillion that can fund renewable energy. President Kenyatta is sitting there. 90% of his economy's energy is renewable, but we still talk about Africa as if we are not doing enough renewable energy. Africa's bonds on the green market do not fetch the kinds of discounts that bonds from other emerging market economies or the developed economy fetch when they're green or sustainable. We need to level the playing field, both in when we have this climate dialogue, but as finally the issue of society, inclusivity. We must ensure that our social protection programs are not social protection programs that keep the continent and the emerging market as big of, a begging bowl to the West, but as part of an inclusive system that delivers prosperity for all. I really believe that financing first, a fair and level playing field on the energy and climate discussion, which allows Africa to recover green, but has a transition that is just and programmed according to Africa's growth and prosperity expectations is important. And finally, leave no one behind, ensure we bring everybody with us as we grow forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your summary there. And Ms. Byanyima, you have the last word. Your two most urgent actions.
Thank you. Almost everything has been said, but here are my two. The world is facing two interrelated crises, the crisis of inequalities, as Rebecca has put it, and the crisis of climate breakdown. We got there because of a broken economic model. We have more of the same won't get us solve those two crises. So I suggest two things. One, we have to go at the heart of the model and see what do we count in that economic model. We obsess with growth. We don't obsess with the things that truly matter. So we must change the way we count our economic and social progress, count the things which matter. Our children's education, our health, our clean air, our planet, of sustaining our planet, These are things to put in there. And some countries are doing it now, beginning to do so. Look at New Zealand. They count GDP, but they also, alongside that, count well-being and put in other factors to measure how they are growing. So we need to shift our focus on growth and find better ways to measure what we value. The second, and my last point, is that for that to happen, we need a multilateralism that is reimagined, where we have our governments, such as the leaders on this panel, together with our businesses, which have a really also broken business model that counts profits and doesn't count what they trash, women's lives, care of work, environment. So we need to get them on board, the businesses, and organized citizens in the organizations. We need a new multilateralism that brings those three forces together to care and to build a just and a sustainable world. Those are my two things that I think this crisis teaches us, that they are urgent, they are important. We've postponed them, we've talked around them, it's time to act on them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Byanyima. It's not often that you sit down and you hear world leaders and opinion makers and the greatest technocrats in the world sit down and actually, be so vocal about stuff. Criticism not only of people who they believe should be doing more, but as in the case of the president of Guyana, President Ali, there, of ourselves, saying even we need to do more. So very much, much appreciated, and let's hope that the world is listening. I know for sure that UNCTAD is listening, but let's hope that the rest of the world is listening, not only the people of the world, but the leaders of the world as well. Just want to say a big thank you to our panelists for this third and final World Leaders Summit of the 15th Quadrennial Conference of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. President Uhuru Kenyatta of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. Irfaan Ali, of the President of Guyana, Ms. Raquel Peña, Vice President of the Dominican Republic, Ms. Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Ms. Winnie Byanyima, who is the Executive Director, Joint Nations Program on HIV/AIDS, and I don't want to leave out especially our host for this event. For those of you, of course, in Barbados, she's our host virtually, but I'm talking about Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who I must say, in the last 2 or so weeks, has probably become my favorite leader in the whole world. So thank you very much. Back to you, Sharon.
Thanks so much, Peter. We are very proud of our Prime Minister, I can assure you. It's been a real honor co-moderating these dialogues over the past 2 days with you. There has been very robust discussion, which is hoped will inspire action. Discussions continue in the roundtables over the next 2 days, October 6th and 7th. The topics to be explored are scaling up financing for development, reshaping regional and global value chains, regional integration for a resilient, inclusive and sustainable future, harnessing frontier technologies for shared prosperity, and supporting substantive transformation for greater resilience in a post-pandemic world. These sessions are all available on the virtual platform in the Frangipani Auditorium, so we invite you to attend as many of them as you can. So for now, goodbye from Barbados. Thank you all.